So for those of you who don't know, I really like video game music. A while ago, I made a video about the top 5 tracks you should listen to, which in retrospect was probably more of a top 5 I was listening to around that time, but since then I've been trying to figure out what else I could do with music on this channel. Because music itself is already so powerful, and I think a really good soundtrack can either really propel a game from being good to being great. Something about it being able to enhance the experience of a game in context and still sound amazing even without the context of the game behind it is something that for some reason has stuck with me for a long time. And about maybe a year or two ago now, since I go to school for music performance, I had an assignment to analyze any piece of music of my choosing. And that project actually turned out really well and I had a lot of fun doing it. So I figured I'd start up a new series called Behind the Music, where I essentially take a look under the hood and break down different music from different games and see what exactly makes them so amazing. So if you have any suggestions on breakdowns you'd like to see, let me know down below. Now, for the first episode of Behind the Music, let's take a journey through Dearly Beloved from Kingdom Hearts 3. Now before we start, I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. Kingdom Hearts 3's Dearly Beloved is by far my favorite, and not just because it's my favorite Kingdom Hearts game. The level of complexity it has in it and how much work into crafting this piece easily made it one of my favorite pieces that Yoko Shimomura put out over the years. The emotion it brings out and just what it does to me is just so freaking magical. I make sure to never skip it when I start playing Kingdom Hearts 3. Well, unless I really want to beat up Yozora Shion, but that's besides the point. But for now, let's get to it. So even now, the first 15 seconds, there's already quite a bit to unpack here. So picture this, think back to over 2 years ago. You sit down, Kingdom Hearts 3 is finally in your hand and you're about to play. You just finished watching the Don't Think Twice intro and you're at the menu screen about to listen to the new Dearly Beloved. I think that's the feeling Yoko Shimomura was trying to play off of. Because this Dearly Beloved starts with this light piano texture, these very delicate notes, just like every Dearly Beloved does. But what this does differently is it sort of builds up this tension, it keeps building and building until it finally releases and opens up to the rest of the piece. That tension and release you hear in this piece is something you'd expect to hear in some sort of grand reveal, and in essence that's what this section does. Already in the first 15 seconds of the piece, Yoko is basically telling us that yeah, you've heard Dearly Beloved before, but Kingdom Hearts 3 is finally here, let's turn it up to 11. Now honestly, there's so much more I could say about this, but we gotta keep it moving. So from the beginning to now, this whole intro sequence right here is one of the reasons this Dearly Beloved is my favorite, and it's because of one technique that a lot of composers play around with called orchestration. And what that is basically how different instrument groups are layered. So you'll usually hear the higher voices on top, like violins, flutes, and other instruments that sort of sound that pitch. And instruments that have lower voices like tuba, trombone, or string bass are usually on the lower layers. Now, if a piece has a lot going on at any given point in time, like this, you would say that this piece has a thick orchestration. And this is different from a piece that has less going on at any given point in time, kind of like this. Think of it as some sort of musical lasagna. Yeah, that sounds about right. Because each individual layer is sort of stacked on top of each other, and while they function well individually, they work together to create something more than the sum of its parts. But if you eat lasagna by its individual layers and not as a whole, like we got a problem. And also, yes, I just compared music to lasagna, but hey, you know, if it works, it works. But what I like about this orchestration is how in maybe the first 30 seconds, you have this very light piano texture that sounds very delicate, and it changes to a thicker texture that sounds like more of an arrival point. Which is honestly something that could be said about the piece as a whole, but we'll get there when we get there. And something interesting that happens in this intro is that the whole piece is basically subverting the audience's expectations here. Like, you're starting up this game and expecting this gorgeous rendition of Dearly Beloved, and you get that later, but not before hearing this sort of beautiful piano concerto of an intro. And you'll find that that's really what the piece as a whole is about, because it does that many times. And if you listen closely, there's this really nice string line that follows you into the main melody before it fades into the accompaniment, which is really small, but something that I just really enjoy. But alright, let's move on. So right off the bat, it's here that we get the Dearly Beloved that we've been expecting, but it's actually in a different key than what we've heard before. And if you don't know what a key is, it's basically the note that a piece of music revolves around. So you can kind of go wherever you want, but that note will always be home for that song. Now what's interesting about this is that most versions of Dearly Beloved that we hear are in the key of E flat, but this version actually starts a major sixth above that, or a minor third below I guess, and starts on the key of C. And if you take your ears off the main melody for a second, you can hear the piano playing this really nice counter melody below it. Now, I bet at this point you're wondering, why is this happening? What happened to my beautiful Dearly Beloved? Well, this is what happened. While you're essentially trying to figure out what happened to the melody of Dearly Beloved and why it changed, Shimomura basically takes you back into the melody that we all know and love in one fell swoop. And this time she has the strings and piano playing the main theme in unison, but she does something amazing with them later in the piece. And then once we're settled into the main melody and back into the key of E flat major like other Dearly Beloveds, Yoko Shimomura takes it one step further with the orchestration and just starts going insane with it. Yeah, see what I mean? This is Yoko Shimomura playing with the audience expectations again, but she does it so beautifully. When you're essentially trying to figure out what happened to the melody of Dearly Beloved, Shimomura basically sweeps you back into the melody we all know and love in one fell swoop. And this time, she has the strings and piano playing the main theme in unison, and she does something amazing with them later in the piece. And then once we're settled into the melody and back into the key of E flat major, Yoko Shimomura takes it one step further with the orchestration and just starts going insane with it. Now remember what we were talking about earlier about the concept of orchestration? Well, this is where it gets really good, because Yoko Shimomura basically takes everything we know about Dearly Beloved being this sort of calm and tranquil piece, and it transforms it here into something beautiful. Because now, not only do you have much thicker orchestration than what we started off with at the beginning, but now you have the strings and the rest of the orchestra singing this beautiful lyrical melody. But at this point, I'm gonna ask you to listen beyond the melody and try to hear what the rest of the orchestra is doing, because in my opinion, that's much more interesting. If you listen past the melody, you'll hear something very interesting happening in the piano, and that's where the magic happens. If you're listening to the melody, it sounds pretty simple, like yeah, you know, the piano and the strings are playing the melody in unison. And while it does that, the piano makes sure to accent the beats to bring out the beats that line up with the strings to give you the illusion that it's still playing the main melody. But what it's actually doing is hiding beneath the top layers and playing these really virtuosic lines. So it has you thinking it's playing the melody when it's really just growing and growing until we get to the next section of the piece, which is, in my opinion, the most climactic part of the piece. It's at this moment right here where all the layers in this music, you have the strings, you have the brass, you have even some percussion instruments in there, and you have the piano. Every layer just sort of interacts with each other and comes together to just make this beautiful piece of music, this beautiful experience. So slowly over the course of the piece, everything leads to this moment. It's maybe about 30 seconds of the most intense yet somehow calm music I've heard in the series thus far. The piano really ends up becoming the star of the show and really takes over that melody, and it shows us this complex yet virtuosic spirit that up until this point hasn't been present in Dearly Beloved. The only time it really gets out of the way is to show off this quick little brass fanfare that happens before coming back in and taking over once again. This moment to me is some of Yoko Shimomura's finest work, because on the biggest stage of the series, she delivers this really grandiose rendition of Dearly Beloved to fit the occasion. Now, what I hear happening here is that while the orchestration of the piece at this point is really thick, because at this point we have a full orchestra playing, it never really sounds loud or in your face. If anything, the fullness of this sound right now sounds more like an overwhelming elegance than a sort of loud or crass feeling. It has an intensity about it because there are just so many things happening at once, but it never gets to the point of being too much, or it never really overstays its welcome. And right after giving this really majestic display of instrumentation and orchestration, the piece begins to wind down. Now, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. In the intro before we hit the main theme of Dearly Beloved earlier, I said the piece had a way of creating that tension and gently resolving it. And with this ending, that's really what ends up happening to the piece as a whole. You start off with this small, nice, thin piano texture and slowly build and build until you get this grandiose, majestic sounding piano concerto with full orchestra accompaniment before gently floating down until the end of the piece. Except the difference this time around is the piano is still carrying on with the virtuosity that it had during the climax of the piece, and while it's still complex, it's very gentle now and leads into honestly my favorite part about this piece, and that's the ending. Honestly, that is one of the most satisfying endings I've ever heard in a piece of music. You can tell that Yoko Shimomura really put in a lot of work into crafting this piece, because at the end of the day, this is the first song of hers that people hear, and she really went all out in this piece. I can appreciate the complexity that went into this piece, because while the other versions of Dearly Beloved aren't bad by any means, this one really holds something special because in maybe 2.5 minutes, it holds the world within it. Honestly though, I had a lot of fun making this video. It's really fun talking about music with you guys. So honestly, I don't even care if this video doesn't necessarily do well as far as views or watch time. Dissecting music is always a fun time for me, and it's really special that I get to share it with you guys. So hey, if you like these kinds of videos, share it out, leave me a like, let me know that you enjoy them so I have more incentive to make them. And if you want me to do a breakdown on some other music, let me know what you'd like to see. And of course, if you want to help me out, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join the community Discord. But that's going to be all from me today. So this is Moose Wayne, signing off.